Now, I'm going to define our terms here. Let me define theism. Theism is the belief that a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent being is the ground of all reality, all that exists. And I'm going to give evidence for a theistic God, a God that Aristotle would call the unmoved mover, a God that the Jews and the Christians would call Yahweh, although I'm not going to be able to get into Christianity here, we don't have enough time, but a God consistent with the God of the Bible. Atheism, on the other hand, says no such being exists. Material reality is all that exists. Now, here is my thesis. My thesis is that since many aspects of reality are immaterial, not merely material, atheism cannot be true. Theism better explains what we actually perceive about reality. Now, what is the evidence here that reality is better explained by theism? Here's some of the evidence. It's in an acrostic, CRIMES, C-R-I-M-E-S, and hopefully this will help you remember what I'm trying to say here. We'll start with the C, the cosmos, that the universe had a beginning. Now, many people call this the Big Bang. Now, I should have had sound for that. I had the coolest sound effect. Can we try that again, Ronnie? This is evidence of what we call the Big. I'm sorry, the sound's not working. Anyway, we're supposed to go bang, and you're all supposed to go wow. Now, a lot of Christians are afraid of the Big Bang. They don't believe in the Big Bang. Look, I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it, okay? The evidence for the Big Bang is quite good. You even have agnostic astronomers like Paul Davies from Arizona State University saying this: the Big Bang represents the creation event, the creation not only of all the matter and energy in the universe, but also of space-time itself. That space-time and matter had a beginning out of nothing. This is Alexander Vilenkin from Tufts University. In 2003, he teamed up with Alan Guth and one other cosmologist to basically, according to him, prove that the universe had a beginning. Now, Vilenkin is even a believer in the multiverse, that there are many universes out there, but he says even if there are, the whole show needs an absolute beginning. He actually uses the word proof. Here's what he said: with the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, this beginning was not some sort of random explosion. This was a highly fine-tuned, guided event. In fact, from the very beginning, the expansion rate of the universe, if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million, a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. You change the expansion rate, that infinitesimal amount, we're not here. In fact, the expansion rate right now is fine-tuned. So is the gravitational force. If it were altered by more than 1 in 10 to the 40, we wouldn't be here. Now, what is that? Well, that's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around it. No, I can't either. Let me give you an illustration. Take a tape measure and stretch it across the entire known universe. By the way, that's a long way. Set the gravitational force at a particular inch mark on that tape measure. I realize gravity is not measured in inches. This is just give you a scale idea in your mind. If you were to move the strength of gravity 1 inch in either direction, we wouldn't be here. Now, there's only 3 possibilities for why that value is the way it is. Physical necessity, it had to be there. Well, no, it didn't have to be there. It could have been here, could have been here, could have been 1,000 miles that way. Chance, which really isn't a cause at all. It's just a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. I don't have enough faith to believe that it just happened to be right there. The third possibility is design, that somebody designed it to be right there. And when you look at all the other constants that are fine-tuned, that seems to make the most sense. In fact, Arno Penzias, a Nobel laureate, he won a Nobel Prize in physics for discovering the remnant heat from the Big Bang called the radiation afterglow. Here's what Penzias said. He said, astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing, one with the very delicate balance needed to provide exactly the right conditions required to permit life, and one which has an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan. So this is a highly fine-tuned event. Now, if the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. The evidence leaves us with one of the following 2 options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, my only question is, which view is more reasonable? That no one created something out of nothing, or that someone created something out of nothing? Seems to me someone. Now you can ask who made the someone, but it turns out that if this being created space, time, and matter, the being must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. Now if you're timeless, do you have a beginning? No. The cause of the universe is the uncaused first cause. So who made God? Nobody. He's uncaused. He's outside of time. Now I say, which view is more reasonable? Because the second line of evidence in crimes is reason. Now, David ran the Reason Rally, in fact, organized it in D.C. Richard Dawkins, many other atheists showed up. There's one little problem, though. If you're an atheist, you can't justify reason. In fact, Darwin knew this. If our minds evolved by an unguided process, our brains evolved from an unguided process, Darwin realized the problem. Here was his doubt. He said, with me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind if there are any convictions in such a mind? Why should you believe your mind or your brain if we evolve with unguided processes? And if we're just molecules in motion, we shouldn't believe anything we think. See, atheism cannot explain our ability to reason. Theism can. Here's why. If atheism is true, our minds are just molecular machines, which means we don't have free will, which means we don't reason, we merely react. Therefore, we shouldn't trust any of our thoughts, including the thought that atheism is true. So atheists are fond of calling themselves free thinkers. The problem is there's no freedom and there's no thinking going on, because you don't have free will and you can't really think, or you can't justify thinking, because we're just molecules in motion. Now, the I in crimes stands for information. And this takes us to the information at the very basis of life. You see this? This is a one-celled amoeba. The Darwinists say we all evolved from a one-celled amoeba. The theory of macroevolution, you've heard it, from the goo to you via the zoo. Well, this is the goo. Now, in Darwin's day, nobody knew what was in a cell. Today, we know. Now, before we look at the cell, realize there's an important observation here. It doesn't say made by God or made by natural forces on it, does it? So what do you have to do? You have to make an interpretation. You have to look at the data and make an interpretation. By the way, that's why science doesn't say anything scientists do. All data needs to be interpreted. So how do we interpret the data? Darwin did not have the luxury of knowing what was in the cell. Today, we do. In fact, in order to explain this, let me take you to your breakfast table. Suppose you love alphabet cereal. You're a teenager, and one day you come downstairs to have a bowl of alphabet cereal, and you see the cereal's knocked over on the table, and right in the middle of the table, the letters spell, "Take out the garbage, Mom." What are you going to assume? The cat knocked the box over? Earthquake shook the house? No, you're going to say that that's intelligent design from an intelligent being, Mom. Or let's say you're walking along the beach and you see in the sand, "John loves Mary." What do you assume? The waves did that? Crabs came out of the water and made that message? No, you're going to say that there had to be an intelligent being there, because you know in all your prior experience that messages only come from minds. They don't come from repetitive natural forces. Well, if messages only come from minds, where does this message come from? DNA. Every living thing has DNA. You have DNA. I have DNA. A banana has DNA. Now, what is DNA? Actually, Bill Gates, who, as you know, is no Christian, put it this way. He said, DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. DNA is immaterial. It's an immaterial code. Yes, it's expressed in materials, but the order in which the letters appear is not determined by any chemical, biological, or physical process. It's like a software code. Where I come from, codes always come from coders. Microsoft Word was coded, despite the fact that it breaks down a lot, right? So here's the question, or here's the point. DNA is like a message. It's like Take Out the Garbage Mom, except it's a lot longer than Take Out the Garbage Mom. In fact, your DNA has about 3 billion characters in it, all in the right order, save a few mutations. Now, the question is, how much DNA is in an amoeba? Because you could say, well, maybe it evolved. Maybe it started small and got here, and this code just evolved itself. Before I tell you how much is in an amoeba, let me point out that in an amoeba, you could line up several hundred amoebas in an inch. So we're talking about a microscopic little creature here. And in an amoeba, you have about 1,000 volumes of an encyclopedia worth of information in there. Now, to believe that that resulted by natural forces is like believing that the Library of Congress resulted from an explosion in a printing shop, okay? I don't have enough faith to believe that. Information in life seems to require an intelligent cause. Now, who told me this? Not some Christian. You know who told me this? Richard Dawkins. He's the one that said there's this much information in an amoeba. And he's, of course, probably the leading atheist in the world right now. The M in crime stands for morality. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to visit the Buchenwald concentration camp. 68 years ago this month, the Allies liberated the camp. They went through the front gate, which is still there. They looked to the right, they saw the crematorium, which is still there. They got down to the crematorium, and then they looked into the courtyard attached to the crematorium, and this is what they saw. Brace yourself. Now, if there is no God, this is just a matter of opinion. Why? Because if there's no God, if there's no standard beyond humanity, then this is just your opinion against Hitler's opinion. If there's no standard beyond us, then we're just left with opinions. There are no objective moral rights or objective moral wrongs. In fact, if God does not exist, the Nazis were not wrong. It's just your opinion that they were wrong. If God does not exist, love is no better than rape. Not in an objective way, anyway. You just may not like it. It's just unfashionable, perhaps, but it's not really wrong. If God does not exist, blowing up innocent people watching a marathon is morally no different than feeding the poor. It's just your opinion. If God does not exist, religious crusades are not wrong. I had the opportunity to debate Christopher Hitchens a couple times. I love Christopher Hitchens. He was great. We had a lot of fun. He had a British accent, so he sounded even more brilliant than he was. And you could see both our debates on our website, crossexamined.org, for free. And Hitchens kept talking about all the evil religious people were doing in the Crusades. I say, Christopher, I agree with you. Exactly. But you know what? There's nothing wrong with that if there's no God. Because there's no standard of righteousness. If there's no standard of righteousness, nothing can be unrighteous. In fact, tolerance is no better than intolerance. David, with his organization, rightfully fights for tolerance for atheists. But look, if there's no God, why tolerate anything? Because there is no, in fact, there are no human rights if there is no God. Everything is a matter of opinion. If we're just overgrown germs that got here by some evolutionary process, then we're no different than any other animal. There is no objective morality if there is no God. Now, by the way, I didn't say atheists weren't good people. I didn't say atheists couldn't know morality. What I'm saying here is atheists can't justify morality. Now, let me move on to evil. You're going, wait, he's supposed to bring that up. Evil's an argument against God. Actually, let's take a look at it a little bit more closely. In fact, let's draw a two-column chart here. Does God exist? Yes and no. I've just given some of the evidence that God does exist. Creation, design of the universe, reason, which include the laws of logic, information, and morality. Let me add a couple more. I briefly mentioned free will. We have free will. That can't be explained in an atheistic worldview, because if we're just molecules in motion, we really don't have freedom. We're not really making choices. We're just reacting to previous physical causes. The laws of nature. You ever wonder why the laws of nature are so precise? Why can we take a rover and put it on Mars with absolute precision? Who's holding this universe together? Why are the four fundamental forces so predictable and so precise? It seems like something's holding this all together right now. In fact, as you know, the Christian view of God is not just that he created the universe, but he's sustaining it right now. In fact, this is Aristotle's view. Somebody's holding the universe together right now. God is to the universe as a symphony is to music. Once the symphony stops playing, the music's over. Somebody's holding the universe together right now. Now, on the other side, you'd say evil. If there is a good God, why is all this evil in the world? Well, it turns out that evil is not an argument against God. Evil actually turns out to be an argument for God. Why? Because objective evil presupposes objective good, and objective good requires God. In fact, C.S. Lewis, who was an atheist for a period of time because he thought the world was too unjust, realized that didn't make any sense. Here's what he wrote in Mere Christianity after he became a Christian. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? There is no such thing as injustice unless there's such a thing as justice, and there's no such thing as justice unless there's a standard outside of ourselves that's objective and doesn't change. In fact, we could say it this way: the shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you have to have sunshine. In order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have good without evil. You can have sunshine without shadows, but you can't have evil without good. You can't have shadows without sunshine. So let's adjust our chart. Actually, I think evil we can actually put on the yes side of the ledger. Now, this doesn't explain everything about evil, quite obviously, but the whole idea that there is evil points to good, and good only exists if God exists. Now, the S, science. He's going to bring up science. Actually, no, science does not help the atheists. In fact, science can't be done if atheism is true. In fact, Einstein asked an interesting question. To why can we do science? Here's what Einstein said: the most incomprehensible thing about the world is that it is at all comprehensible. Why is the world comprehensible? Why can we appropriate knowledge about the world and then draw conclusions about the world? Only if theism is true, or at least some immaterial reality is true, can we even do science. Because science is built on a foundation of immaterial realities that theism, not atheism, can explain. In fact, here are many things that atheism can explain but are required to do science. Orderly natural laws, we already talked about that. The law of causality. You can't prove the law of causality by doing a science experiment. You have to assume the law of causality in order to do a science experiment. That's what science does. It looks for causes. The laws of logic that we're using right now to even understand one another. You can't prove them by science. You have to assume them in order to do science. Reason, the ability to reason. We've already talked about that. Free will, we've talked about that. You got to be able to freely evaluate the data and come to a conclusion, because science doesn't say anything, scientists do. Also, realism. That's the idea that we can appropriate through our senses truth about the real world and then draw conclusions from it. Well, that requires having free will, having reason, having these laws of logic. These are all immaterial realities that don't exist if just a material view of the world, i.e. atheism, is true. Finally, morality. We can't even trust scientists unless they're ethical and tell us the results of their experiments truthfully and honestly. You can't prove that by science. You have to assume the scientists are ethical. You can't put honesty in a test tube. All of these things right here are immaterial realities that can't exist if atheism's true. So science isn't a friend of atheism. In fact, it's quite often thought that Christianity or theism's at war with science. Atheism is at war with science, because you can't do science if atheism's true. Now, reality is better explained by crimes: cosmos, reason, information, morality, evil, and science. There are other arguments as well, but I'm running out of time. In fact, let's just take these first four and draw some conclusions about the first cause. From these four aspects of reality, we can reason from effect to cause to learn that God has certain attributes. We're reasoning from effect to cause. We have an effect, we try and figure out what the cause is. From the cosmos, we can see that this being is immaterial, timeless, and spaceless. Why? Because he created material, time, and space. We can also see that he's extremely powerful because he created out of nothing. Do you realize every time we create something, we create out of pre-existing material? God creates out of nothing. What is nothing? Aristotle had a good definition of nothing. He said nothing is what rocks dream about. That's nothing. No space, no matter, no time. From reason, we know that this being is rational, and we can trust our reason then because it ultimately comes from him, not some mindless process. From information or design, we can see that this being is extremely intelligent. He has purpose. From the moral argument, we can see he's absolutely morally perfect, and he's also personal. How do we know he's personal from the moral argument? Because you only have a moral obligation to personal forces. You don't, or to personal forces. You don't have a moral obligation to impersonal forces. When you go try and dunk a basketball, you're not sinning against the law of gravity. We also know he's personal from the cosmological argument, or from the cosmos. Why? Because in order to go from a state of nothingness to a state of existence, someone had to make a choice. and only persons make choices. Gravity doesn't decide to do anything. Gravity doesn't say, look, if he drops that remote one more time, I'm not going to pull it or push it to the ground, right? Gravity does the same thing over and over again, but to go from a state of nothingness to a state of existence, someone had to make a choice. Now notice we have an immaterial, timeless, spaceless, extremely powerful, rational, extremely intelligent, purposeful, morally perfect, personal creator. This is a theistic God identified without reference to any religious book. Now this is not the invisible man in the sky. This is an unlimited cause of all being, including the sky and everything else that exists. This is the unmoved mover of Aristotle and consistent with the Yahweh of the Jews and the Christians, who not only caused all things, but holds them together right now. In conclusion, none of these things can be explained by atheism, but they can be explained by theism. In fact, all of these aspects of reality have an immaterial source or foundation. Therefore, when atheists use or cite any of them to support atheism, they are stealing from God in order to argue against him. And you know, stealing is a crime. So if David starts bringing up science or starts bringing up reasons or starts bringing up, I hope he's bringing up reasons, it's a debate, or starts bringing up evil, these things don't exist if atheism's true. So let's see how he handles it. But these are the reasons, among others, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. None of these are a lack of understanding. We're not arguing from what we don't know. We're arguing from what we do know. In fact, let me ask you this. How many have ever been here to the Grand Canyon? You ever been to the Grand Canyon? You can see it's a beautiful geologic formation, right? But can everybody see the difference between the Grand Canyon, this geologic formation, and this geologic formation? Mount Rushmore. Certainly, wind, rain, and erosion didn't create the faces on Mount Rushmore, right? Certainly not natural erosion, maybe political erosion. But the point here is that if you've got to figure out what caused the faces on Mount Rushmore, you are not going to say it was a natural cause. You're going to say that it required an intelligent cause. And you're not arguing from what you don't know, you're arguing from what you do know. Otherwise, we'd have to say that we're being unscientific when we look at Mount Rushmore and say it's got to be an intelligent cause. No, it's not a natural cause, it's an intelligent cause. Similarly, when you look at Take Out the Garbage Mom, you don't just lack a natural explanation for Take Out the Garbage Mom. It's that Take Out the Garbage Mom is positive, empirically verifiable evidence for an intelligent being. So it's not God of the gaps reasoning. Let me ask you a question. Here's Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. Question, who wrote this book? Is it more reasonable that an author wrote it or the laws of ink and paper? Are we positing a God of the gaps if we say an author wrote a book? No, we are saying that a book is positive evidence for intelligence. We're not arguing from what we don't know, we're arguing from what we do know. In fact, he went on to talk about, David did, he went on to talk about the fact that there is no evidence well, no, he didn't say there was no evidence for, but he said that the creation of the universe was a God of the gaps situation. Actually, it's not at all. This is Robert Jastrow, an agnostic astronomer who wrote a book in 1978 called God and the Astronomers. And on page 1, he says, I'm an agnostic on religious matters. Here's what he said, however, on page 14. The astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. The essential element in the astronomical and biblical accounts of Genesis is the same. He then went on to say this in an interview. And by the way, this is the guy that sat in the same chair Edwin Hubble sat in at the Mount Wilson Observatory in Pasadena, California. So he is a scientist of impeccable credentials. Here's what he went on to say. He said, astronomers now found they painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in this cosmos and on the earth. And they have found that all this has happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. Then he went on to say that there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. Now, why would he say supernatural? Why couldn't nature have created the universe? Because there was no nature. Nature is the effect. It can't be the cause. Nature was the creation. Nature can't be the cause. It was created itself. In fact, I was at the University of Michigan, and an atheist said, this is the God of the gaps argument. He said, give us more time, give science more time, and we'll figure out a natural cause for the universe. I said, John, we will never find a natural cause for the entire universe if the entire universe is all of nature. That's what it appears to be. I said because it's the effect, not the cause. The cause must transcend the effect. If space-time and matter had a beginning, then the cause must be beyond space-time and matter. In other words, must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. I said, to say if we could just give science more time, by the way, that sounds a lot like faith, but anyway, give science a lot more time, we'll figure out a natural cause for all of nature. I said, that would be like me saying, if you just give me more time, I'll figure out I gave birth to my own mother. No, you're not going to do that. Because I'm the effect, I can't be the cause. So he's saying there has to be supernatural forces at work. Why? Because all of nature was created, so it must be something beyond nature, something we would call supernatural nature. In fact, Arthur Eddington, who was a contemporary of Einstein, put it this way: the beginning seems to present insuperable difficulties unless we agree to look on it as frankly supernatural. By the way, he went on to talk about poor design. You can't know whether something is designed poorly or well unless you know the intentions of the designer. In fact, in this universe constrained by physical constraints, there is no such thing as perfect design. This laptop is good for doing presentations, but it's very poor for running NASA. If I try and make it bigger, I can't take it around the country and use it. But it'll be more powerful. If I make it smaller, I can't run NASA, but I can do these PowerPoint presentations. So the intent of the designer is what makes, is how you have to evaluate whether the design is good or not. And by the way, bad design is not no design. My car is not designed perfectly, but it's still designed. And we agree, of course, we live in a fallen world, so everything's broken. Nothing's going to work perfectly. That's the whole point of the fall. Now, he said there's never been an atheist argument that's ever been refuted. Well, let me give you an atheist argument that has been refuted. This is Francis Crick, who helped discover the DNA molecule. Well, he was an atheist. He was a materialist, and so he wrote a book called The Astonishing Hypothesis. And here's what he said in the book. The astonishing hypothesis is that you, your joys, your sorrows, your memories, your ambitions, your sense of personal identity, and free will are, in fact, no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. You know, we're just a meat machine. We don't really reason, we just react. We don't have free will, we think we do, but we don't. Every decision, every thought we have is based on a previous natural cause over which we have no control. Now, that's what this is saying. This is the atheistic view. Now, imagine if Crick had written this in his book. Imagine if he had said that the astonishing hypothesis is that my scientific conclusions that I write in this book are, in fact, no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. Would anybody believe anything he said? No, you see, atheism defeats itself. It's self-defeating to say we're all molecules in motion because we don't really reason, we just react. So why should we believe any of our thoughts, including the thoughts that atheism is true? You see, atheism is the universal acid. It cuts through everything. David got up here and tried to give scientific arguments. I don't know what they were. They weren't really scientific. He just talked broadly in platitudes about science. But again, science doesn't work if atheism's true. Because we're, again, all just molecules in motion, and there is no such immaterial reality. If you recall, all of these things that shore up science, that are at the foundation of science, don't exist in an atheistic universe. He also then went on to talk about morality being relative. Do you think torturing babies for fun is relative? Do you think that's just a matter of opinion? Do you think eating babies is just a matter of opinion? No, this is objectively morally wrong, and we all know it. And it's not just that we know it. He said societies decide. Which society, Mother Teresa's or Hitler? It's not just that we know it. It's not an argument that I know morality from society, and therefore that tells me what the right thing is. The question isn't how we know something. The question is, why does it exist? Why does a moral law exist? There must be a moral lawgiver external to ourselves that doesn't change, that has the authority to show us what rightness and wrongness is. And that's what we mean by God. So the issue isn't how you know it. The issue is, why does it exist? Why is there a moral law out there? I've given evidence that reality is better explained by theism. We've got the cosmos, we have reason, we have information, we have morality, we have evil, we have science. David must refute my arguments and give a case for atheism. He just can't complain about what God does or doesn't do. David has to explain how reality is the way it is in the absence of God. David has given no arguments on how all of reality can be explained by atheism. He has only given complaints about the way the world works. Now, We mentioned that these are the 6 arguments I've been using. Let's take this from an atheistic perspective now. Atheists must believe by faith that the cosmos came into existence and the law of causality was violated, that no one created and fine-tuned the universe out of nothing. That takes more faith to believe than just someone did. With regard to reason, they have to believe by faith that brain matter from an unguided process somehow guides us to truth. How does that happen? Darwin was right about his doubt. If we just have the brain of a monkey mind, why should we believe anything we think? With regard to information, David has to say that the genetic code, thousands of books long, appeared without a coder, just instantaneously. And by the way, Richard Dawkins hasn't figured out how the code could come into existence naturally. If he has, he'd won a Nobel Prize already. With regard to morality, he has to believe there is no objective morality, which he said over and over again, which means human rights don't exist, which means atheists don't have rights, so I don't know what your organization is about. With regard to evil, he has to believe that objective evil doesn't exist, that rape and murder and child abuse are just a matter of opinion. Yet he's come up with many moral objections as the course of the evening has gone through. Also, he has to believe that science works even though everything immaterial that makes it work doesn't really exist. All the things we talked about, free will, reason, the laws of logic, the orderly laws of nature, all of these things, morality. How does science work without being ethical, without being moral? It doesn't work because we'll get bad results if we fudge the data. Now, none of these things can be explained by atheism. None of them. In fact, all of these aspects of reality have an immaterial source or foundation. Therefore, when atheists cite any of them to support atheism, they are stealing from God in order to argue against him. And that's all he's done tonight. He keeps using the language of theism to complain about God, but he doesn't provide any evidence for atheism, how this universe could be the way it is. In fact, let me be a little bit more explicit. Consistent atheists must believe that no one created something out of nothing, that the Big Bang was fine-tuned without a fine-tuner, that natural laws arose without a lawgiver, that the laws of logic and mathematics are not objective. This is self-defeating, because as soon as you try and use logic to refute something, you're using logic. If you try and deny logic, if you try and say logic's made of material, you're using logic. If you say it's not objective, what are you using to say it's not objective? Objective moral values don't exist. He's already said that. A genetic code of thousands of books long just popped into existence without a coder. That mind arose from mere matter. That consciousness and free will are illusions. And that science works even though everything that undergirds it doesn't exist. You have to have a lot of faith to be an atheist. You have to reject what is right in front of our eyes, that these things have immaterial realities that don't exist in an atheistic universe. So David can complain all he wants about religion and about the Bible and about all things he doesn't like, which he's already admitted it's just his opinion. There's not a real objective truth out there. But that doesn't give a case for atheism. In fact, it's easy to smell a rotten egg. It's hard to lay a better one. And he has not laid a better one here tonight. He hasn't provided any evidence for atheism. He's only speculated about how maybe something could be explained without reference to God, but he hasn't come up with any of it. And by the way, these arguments are not God of the gaps arguments. These arguments are all based on what we do know, not what we don't know. How
30 seconds.
30 seconds. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, I also want to point out that we're just scratching the surface here. If you really want to go deeper, get my book, get other books, get Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, get The Case for the Creator by Lee Strobel, get Reasonable Faith by William Lane Craig and On Guard by William Lane Craig. Get books that David writes and read both sides and try and figure out for yourself. But as soon as you do that, what are you admitting? You're admitting there's a truth out there and we have the ability to reason and figure out what that truth is. If that's the case, atheism isn't true. Theism is the best explanation for reality. Thank you very much for listening.